Welcome to the Backpacking Light podcast, where we discuss the philosophy and skills of traveling light so you can experience the outdoors with more comfort, more safety, and more enjoyment. I'm your host, Andrew Marshall. Thanks for joining us on this lifelong journey of doing more with less as we venture into wild places and empty spaces.
Look for me in the mountains where walking has a way of pulling you to your peace of mind every day.
Today I'm joined by Doug Johnson. Doug's been around BPL for a long time, since 2003 in fact, and over the last few years has been cultivating an interest in ultralight backcountry luxury. Doug just finished work on a huge gear guide that covers a range of options for ultralight backcountry seating. We thought it would be a fun topic for a podcast as well, so here we are. Doug, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew.
So, Doug, let's start out by just exploring how you got interested in the concept of ultralight luxury. Can you go into that and then walk us through some of the things you've explored?
So yeah, I was really into ultralight backpacking and got into super ultralight backpacking, back before I had kids. But then when I had kids, I wanted to bring them on the adventures too. That changed backpacking for me a lot. I still used ultralight techniques, but having the kids along meant that the distances were shorter and it was more about going at their pace. And so with that, I was able to start bringing along some items that I didn't bring along before, like a big tarp to stay out of the rain when camping on the coast, or using a hot tent. And then one of those things was bringing a chair along and enjoying relaxing and hanging out in camp rather than just putting the miles down on the trail.
You've also explored the different luxurious ultralight sleeping pads. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of them is, having a really nice, comfortable sleep. Sometimes, depending on the trip, it's about bringing different cooking equipment, making pancakes, for example, on a frying pan, which is something I didn't do with ultralight backpacking before this. Having a comfortable 4-inch sleeping pad, that's absolutely another one. Bringing a hammock. These are things that I've been playing with to really increase the enjoyment at camp. So that's what got me thinking more about ultralight luxury and adding some things back into my pack.
Awesome. Well, the subject of the podcast today is seating options. But before we go any further, let's narrow this down a bit because there's a lot of options out there. So can you go into what we're talking about today and more specifically what we're not talking about today?
Yeah, sure. So what we're talking about today are framed seats, so chairs that have a frame and are elevated off the ground. We're talking about inflatable seat kits, so the ones where you take your sleeping pad and you put it into a chair kit. We're talking about those. We're talking about the closed cell foam seats. So that's the same type of a chair, but it's one that, like a Crazy Creek, one that doesn't have, you don't need to put another sleeping pad into it. We're also talking about on-ground pole-supported seats, which is a piece of fabric. It has a little bit of a frame behind it to hold it upright so you can lean back, but you're on the ground. And we're also talking about suspended seats. Those are things like hammock chairs. What we did not include in this are sitting pads for sitting on the ground just on a sit pad. We also didn't include stools. Those are things that we did not include.
Right. So what all of the things that we did include have in common is they give you the ability to lean back or have some sort of back support. Why was that important to you?
Well, the focus of this was about relaxing in camp and playing around with different seats through the years here. I found that I really enjoy being able to lean back and relax, kind of sit back in camp. Now, the other options are great too, but I was really looking at one where you could lean back, relax, enjoy the view, and, soak up the campsite.
I think the other thing we need to point out is that you definitely had sort of a hard weight cutoff for yourself when you started to consider the seats for this gear guide. What was that cutoff?
Yeah, so for this gear guide, we were looking at chairs that were 1.5 pounds or less. I was really looking at a goal of 1 pound, but as I was looking at the different options that were out there, I decided to expand it a little bit to 1.5 pounds. That seems like an item that you could throw into a pack without it being too much. I wanted to choose items that someone might say, hey, I could throw that pound in my pack, or maybe a pound and a half, but not have it be too much.
That goes back to what you were saying earlier. If you have a 14 or 15 pound base weight, adding another pound to get you a pretty high degree of comfort, it seems like a good choice.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about was if you're looking at luxury items that are around a pound or less, then you're able to throw in a 1 pound tarp, for example, to be out of the rain, your 1 pound chair to sit and relax and enjoy that time outside. So I was thinking about things kind of in that 1 pound range, but yeah, that's exactly what it was. If your pack is light enough, you can add a few of these things in to increase your enjoyment, but without getting into traditional backpacking weights.
All right, well, let's talk about some seats. One of your favorites was the Big Agnes Cyclone SL chair kit. Now, the Cyclone SL belongs to this category we mentioned earlier that we're calling inflatable seat kits. So, Doug, what's the deal with these seat kits?
A seat kit basically is a folding piece of fabric that has some kind of frame structure, whether it's carbon or aluminum stays that are inside that add the structure. And then there's a strap on the side that adjusts it so you can get the angle just right for leaning back or sitting up. They're adjustable in that way. The first one of these that I was aware of that came to the market years ago was Crazy Creek, but these are kind of people think of these as stadium chairs now, canoe seats, this kind of a style. Now, the chair kits are different than some of those stadium seats because they're designed to use the sleeping pad that you're already bringing on a trip. You slide it into the frame, usually deflate it a little bit, and then that's what gets you your seat.
One of the major pros of this category is that you have all the comfiness of your inflatable sleeping pad.
Well, that's right. And you don't have to bring much else. The Big Agnes Cyclone SL chair kit, that only weighs 6.5 ounces. So it's a small item that is very light that you can put into your pack, just under half of a pound. But you slip your sleeping pad into it that you already have. And, the sleeping pad that I used with it is a 4-inch sleeping pad. So that means doubled up, it's 8 inches, and you have a really comfortable seat to sit in and relax and camp.
And with these, did you find that the reclining angle worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, the way it works is that you can tighten that up, and then it makes it so it gets more into a V shape, and that makes it so you can lean back and really relax.
What are some of the cons of this category?
Well, one thing is that you have to take your sleeping pad and you have to take it out of your tent and put it out in the elements. And that's really the downside of the Big Agnes Cyclone SL chair kit is that the sleeping pad sticks out on the sides a little bit. So you have to be very aware of your expensive and easy to puncture air pad because now you're taking it out, putting it in the rocks. So you have to think about a way to protect that, really making sure that you're putting it in a area that doesn't have sharp sticks or thorns or rocks, and you have to be paying close attention to keep your pad from popping on you.
The converse of that problem is that you mentioned in the gear guide that this system also tends to bring dirt and twigs back into your shelter once you're done using the system.
That's right, and I think there are other chair kits out there that protect the pad and keep it cleaner, perhaps. But I think no matter what, you bring that out, you put it in the dirt, you're sitting in it, and then that dirt comes back into your shelter. That's a downside.
Yeah, it looks like the Sea to Summit air chair in particular has a little more coverage on the bottom and the sides, but you really liked the Cyclone SL. What was it about that particular chair kit that really attracted you?
Well, the thing that attracted me to that chair was the weight, first of all. It's the lightest one on the market. But also, once I put my chair into it, it was a very, very comfortable seat. It provided great structure for the pad. But truthfully, it was the weight that I looked at first with that chair.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting as I was working on the gear guide with you is that some of these inflatable seat kits are getting a little hard to find, actually. A few of them we looked at are no longer available. Some of them are only available in the outlet outdoor stores. What do you think it is about this design that seems like it's kind of being phased out?
Interesting. I don't know if I'd call it phased out, but I think there are a lot more options on the market now. When these chairs first started coming out, there weren't other options. It was this or a Crazy Creek. There were those kinds of choices, but you didn't have all of the elevated frame chairs. There was nothing that was in a lightweight category. So this was kind of what you had to choose from. Now there are more choices, and perhaps that's why there are fewer of them on the market now. It's a good question.
So you looked at a few different approaches to seat design in the gear guide. That's actually one of the things that I think is so interesting about this topic is that they're all seats, but the approaches to them vary so wildly. Was there any particular design that you just didn't find was worth the time and effort and the wait?
Yeah, the style that I refer to as on ground pole supported seats. There were a lot of trips when I carried one of those chairs and I just left it in my pack and didn't end up using it. It just didn't seem worth it. The deal with these chairs is you have a long piece of fabric that basically is from your bottom up to your back, and then pulls an insert to the top of the fabric and cross and are pressed into the ground, making it so you can lean back in the chair. It's kind of a bit of a lounge chair kind of a look when you're sitting in it. But that approach, it's just one that I didn't find that was worth it for me. It is also, though, the lightest chair that we reviewed was the Lightsmith Quickback UL chair. That's the lightest chair out there. But I found that I tended to not use it. I tended to sit on the ground without a chair instead.
And the Lightsmith Quickback, it has some interesting issues. Can you go into what you found happened when you tried to use that seat?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's got these carbon fiber poles that come with it, and the poles appear to be stiff enough. But I found that anytime that I put this chair on soft ground, that the poles would dig into the soil, and then the chair would kind of collapse behind me. So I'd end up falling backward while using the chair. You had to get it just right to make it effective. So the Mountain Smith Slingback is the other chair in this category that I took a look at. That one had a larger piece of fabric. It was a piece of fabric that I tended to slip less on it, because that was another problem with the Lightsmith chair, was that when using nylon pants with it, they would slip on that fabric and that would cause the chair to collapse as well. But the Mountain Smith Slingback was a tougher and less slippery piece of fabric, and it used trekking poles. Well, the trouble was that getting the trekking poles just right, you had to have trekking poles that could collapse pretty short, and you could get them in there. But because of the size of typically a basket on the trekking pole and the size and weight of those poles, it tended to stay in place a lot better, and it was more functional.
So both of these chairs, you essentially just have a thin layer of heavy-duty synthetic fabric between you and the ground. Did you ever run into any trouble with, like, cold soaking up through the ground into your rear end, essentially?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you put it right on the ground. If it's muddy, if it's wet, you're sitting in that. I mean, they're waterproof, but still, that the water's right there, and the cold ground goes through as well. Now, there were times that I added in a foam pad, like if you had a foam sit pad, you could add that into the system, and that would improve it. But again, it's a kind of a complex thing to get it just right, and I found that typically these chairs ended up sitting in my pack more than being used. But they might be great for somebody. They just weren't perfect for me.
Sure, sure. And that speaks to a larger point, which is that everybody's needs are different, depending on the weather you're in, the type of environment you're in, the vegetation you have around you, and which is one of the reasons we looked at so many different chairs and seats here, because there's just so many ways to approach this particular problem.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the opposite design approach. What's the deal with suspended seats?
So suspended seats are like hammock chairs. You suspend them from a tree or between trees, and then you have a chair to sit in around camp.
So there's a couple of pros here. They're pretty light. They pack down fairly small, and they keep you off the ground. Um, you ran into a couple of issues. Can you go into those?
Yeah, so I looked at two different types of hammock chairs. One is called the Chammock, and two other options are made by Dutchware. So, first, the Chammock is a chair that hangs between two trees with the attachment points to the right and the left of you. That chair looked really interesting, but it was the least comfortable chair that we reviewed. It forced you to sit in a very, very upright position, much like a formal dining room chair, and nobody found this chair to be comfortable. But on the other hand, the Dutchware hammock chairs, the netless hammock chair and the 2Ts hammock chair, those were a lot more comfortable. It's basically a half length hammock. So you sit in this chair, and it's much like sitting in a hammock, but they come down at a slight angle. You sit up a little bit more, but the problem with that is there really isn't a good place to put your feet. You end up putting your feet out on the cord, which isn't very comfortable, especially if you're not wearing shoes. Um, or you have to kind of hang them off the side, and that I found that I was preferring a hammock rather than use those chairs actually.
Yeah, there's a pretty funny photo in the gear guide of, I think it's your daughter, trying to get comfortable in the Chammock, and she's like almost upside down with her legs sticking out over her head. It's pretty humorous.
Yeah, we kept looking for ways to get comfortable, and she said, "You know what's more comfortable is when you turn your entire body to the left, which is like not at all how the chair was designed." But even that one, she was pretty much done with it in a few minutes.
Oh, you mentioned that your kids in particular really liked the Dutchware options. Is this the ideal seating for a trip with kids?
Well, I think that's a great chair for kids. When I sat in that chair, it was really hard. I had to be you kind of in a yoga position to keep my feet inside of it without putting it out on the cord. But for the kids, they could climb into it, have their feet inside. They loved it. They would sit in that chair for hours, and they just loved sitting in those chairs. So I would say that the Dutchware netless hammock chair or the 2Ts chair, both of those are great for kids.
And the Dutchware netless hammock chair actually weighs in at just like 6.4 ounces. So not only is it well sized for children, but they could put it in their pack and carry it with them instead of you having to haul it around.
Exactly. And that 6.4 ounces includes the suspension. And it's long enough to suspend between a variety of trees. So that is a really good option. Now, the Chammock, by contrast, is 16.1 ounces with all of the suspension. So that's really not a lightweight chair, not comfortable nor lightweight.
So really no reason to haul it along then.
No, I can't find one.
So let's talk about one last category, frame supported seats. Is it accurate to say that this is your favorite category?
Oh, this is my favorite category. No doubt about it.
So let's go into how this is designed here because there's some pretty significant differences between how these particular seats are designed and what someone might be thinking of when they think of like a soccer chair or a chair you would take, on a car camping trip.
Yeah, well, this is a little bit like those camping chairs. Is you just have to think of it in kind of in miniature, without a high back, and with a frame that has very very short legs. So you're much closer to the ground, and then they have typically an aluminum frame that suspends a sling, a fabric sling, and that provides that seat. So they are the most like camping chairs that people would think of.
And what is it that you really love about this category?
Oh, they're just the most comfortable. I found that there's a few things. You can carry it anywhere in camp that you want. Unlike a suspended chair or a hammock, you can carry this to any area in a campsite. You can go for a walk down the trail to some viewpoint, set it down, enjoy that view, relax, cook dinner, bring it back. I mean, I oftentimes will carry these all around a campsite, but you're off the ground as well. If it's wet or muddy, you're off the ground. They're really nice to sit in while cooking, just relaxing, enjoying the view, watching wildlife, using binoculars, listening to music, whatever you want to do. It is the most comfortable chair to sit in by far. Every single person who tried all of these chairs, because we would bring sometimes 5, 6 chairs on a trip and have everybody try different ones, and people would always go back to these framed chairs.
So can you lean back in these at all or tip these back?
Yeah, I do that all the time. You can lean back in these chairs. Some do it better than others, and a lot of times because they're so lightweight, you might get some flex in that frame once you move to from the four legs to two legs. But yes, you can definitely sit back and relax in those chairs. As long as you're not probably too far over the weight limit, because again, they can be kind of flexible when they're on two legs.
Well, let's talk about the A-Light Monarch because I think that's a really fascinating design.
That is a really, really cool chair, actually. The A-Light Monarch has a frame that comes back to 2 points. So it's supported at each corner of the back and then in the front, but the poles cross and they have only two legs that touch the ground with large plastic balls on the bottom of those legs. And it is a chair that when you get out of it, it falls over. It is designed to be balanced in. And it really is a cool chair.
Did you ever run into like losing concentration or dozing off while you were sitting in this chair and then facing the consequences for that?
I would say that most people that sat in this chair fell over at some point. Yes. Um, it's not a chair where you can take a nap. If you do, you fall over. It's more of an active chair. You have to maintain that balance. But it's surprisingly great at holding that balance. I could sit in that chair for a very, very long period of time, and it's a very nice chair to sit in and relax.
The other thing that I think is interesting about the design, and I have no idea if this was intentional or not, but one of the problems with this chair category is that it is susceptible to becoming unstable when it is in sandy or very loose soil.
Right.
But the A-Light Monarch gets around that by those 2 points just sinking into the sand and creating a more stable position.
No, that's right. That's where this chair is the very best, is when you put it on sand, mud, soft soils. It sinks in a little bit, and then that will make it so it stays upright even when you get up and out of it. It is the best chair in sandy conditions. Besides perhaps putting a fabric bottom panel on some of the four-legged chairs, that's something that also can do the same thing. But this chair is great in sand and soft soils.
How about the Knox ground chair? That's a chair that you really like, but it's unfortunately no longer in production.
Yeah, no, I like that chair a lot. It's lower than the new Knox Chair Zero, but it has a frame that gives it a lot of support on soft soils as well. That's a chair that when you put it in sand, it doesn't sink in as much. It's a very, very comfortable and a very stiff chair. That's the best chair that I found for leaning back because the frame has so much more stiffness to it. There aren't single legs coming out from the design. It's a big, solid structure underneath you.
Yeah, the downside is it's a little heavier than some of the chairs that are being made now. Is that correct?
That's right. It's heavier and it also is lower to the ground. And I think that as much as I like that chair, I found myself wanting to sit in the Knox Chair Zero or the REI Flex Light Air. I preferred those. Sitting up a little bit higher was more comfortable in my opinion.
Well, let's talk about those two chairs because they are your favorites in the guide and they are getting a lot of great buzz. So, what's the deal with these chairs? How are they similar? How are they different? Let's go into it.
Yeah, these chairs have a lot in common. They have aluminum frames. They're supported. The slings of the chair are supported in very similar ways. They have four legs that come out from the bottom. They're very similar heights off the ground, and they're very similar in comfort as well. They basically have frames that are oriented in different ways. The Heliox Chair Zero has a frame that goes kind of from left to right, where the REI Flex Light Air has a frame that is oriented from front to back. But in use, they are very, very similar.
And these are two of the most comfortable seats that you tested in our entire gear guide.
Oh yeah, and we had, I don't know, 20 or 30 different people try out different chairs at different times. These are the chairs that were the universal favorites by everybody. These were the chairs that ended up being used the most and were enjoyed by people the most. People would oftentimes go back and forth between these two chairs, and we would have debate about which one was more comfortable. It was really, really close.
So, if you want a really in depth comparison of these two chairs, as well as a video, Ryan Jordan did a really great comparison of the two, really went into the biomechanics and the science behind that. And we'll put a link to both that video and that article in the show notes. If you had to choose between one of these two, which one would you choose and why?
I would choose the REI FlexLight Air Chair. That was my favorite. I found that chair to be just a little bit more comfortable. It didn't pinch my hips, just had a little bit less pinch on my hips. I preferred that chair. Other people preferred the Knox Chair Zero. For me, I could go either way really, but in the end, the REI FlexLight is just a little bit lighter, and that gives me the edge here. I prefer that chair. A little more comfortable and a little bit lighter.
And about $20 cheaper.
That's true. Okay, the other thing here, like the kind of my final aha moment was like, what would I actually bring? I would choose a hammock. I wouldn't choose a hammock chair. I would choose a hammock.
Well, let's go into that a little bit. We intentionally excluded hammocks from our gear guide, just trying to narrow it down a little bit so we could have some focus about what to talk about. But maybe it's worth a little sidetrack. So what are your thoughts? Why would you bring a hammock instead of so many of these seating options?
Well, we did include hammocks because hammocks aren't chairs. You can sit in them, but they're really designed to lay down and relax. But as I went through this and I asked myself at the end, what is the chair that I'm going to be bringing with me on the most trips in the future? It's one of the frame chairs. It's either going to be the Knox Zero or the REI FlexLight Air Chair. But as I thought more about the other chairs, I thought, what I would bring is a hammock. It's a lightweight hammock, can be lighter than most of the chairs that we reviewed here. And you don't have that flexibility of moving it around camp, but it is the place if you want to lay down, relax, and really enjoy, being in the trees up by your campsite. Like, you can't beat a hammock. And I think a hammock beats a hammock chair all the time for me.
So what you're saying is, for people who don't already utilize a hammock as a shelter, let's say you have an on-the-ground shelter, you're advocating bringing along a lightweight. So what would it be? 10 ounces, somewhere in there?
Well, my favorite setup is the Button-A-Sling Weight Weenie Micro. And I use Venom straps and I use the Beckett hitch. And then you get an entire hammock with the full suspension for 8.5 ounces. So barely over half a pound. And that is a very, very comfortable hammock to relax in during the day. It's not necessarily the perfect hammock for sleeping in, but for relaxing in camp, that is a great option right there. There's others as well, like from Dutchware. There are other great hammocks on the market, but that's the one that I've really used a lot recently.
All right, Doug, I'm going to give you a bit of a challenge here. I'm going to pull out my timer, and I'm going to give you 45 seconds to turn someone who is a true purist, a true ounce counter, gram shaver, into someone who would consider bringing along one of these options. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to give you much time to prepare here. So I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, go.
There are times when you're going to want to cover some serious mileage and get high up in the mountains. You don't want to carry a chair. Leave that behind. Get your pack weight as low as you can and enjoy the walk. Sometimes that's what trips are about. But other times, you're wanting to get to a destination and relax and enjoy yourself. Throwing that extra pound in your pack and having a chair to sit in camp, watching the sunset, drinking a little bit of whiskey, and relaxing and talking with your friends and listening to the birds, a chair can add so much to your experience. If you're going a shorter distance and you don't mind having that extra pound in your pack, a chair can add a lot to your relaxation in camp. That's why I recommend a chair.
You nailed it. There's my timer going off.
How did I do?
You did great. I think you did great.
Are you convinced, Andrew?
I'm convinced. I've got the Knox Chair Zero, and I'm going to take it on my next trip.
I think it's a good call.
Yeah. Well, Doug, thank you so much for your insights here. Thank you for the gear guide, and thanks for joining us on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good one, everybody.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Backpacking Light podcast. This podcast is brought to you by backpackinglight.com, which has been providing information and education about lightweight wilderness travel since the year 2000. The Backpacking Light podcast is supported by subscription fees paid by our loyal website subscribers, and we are extremely grateful for your support. A backpackinglight.com subscription can save you time and money on your quest to lighten your pack weight, spend more time in the outdoors, and connect with a community of like-minded hikers. So if you aren't yet a backpackinglight.com subscriber, please consider subscribing and gain access to over 1 million forum posts, 4 million words of original content, more than 2,000 articles, and access to our Wilderness Adventures trekking programs. You can subscribe online right now at backpackinglight.com/subscribe. If you have feedback, questions, or tips for our listeners, please share them via email at podcast@backpackinglight.com. You can download the show notes for this episode by visiting backpackinglight.com/podcast. This podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So leave us a review. It helps other people find the show. Thanks for listening to the Backpacking Light podcast. I'm Andrew Marshall, and if we can leave you with one parting message, it's this: pack less, be more, because lighter is better. Be well, everybody.
So I shoulder my backpack, walk away from the